to The Game Debate, a 10-minute discussion wherein Webb the Critical Android and Stefan JD will debate the merits or lack thereof of a video game they have both played. They each will receive exactly 3 minutes to present their opening arguments. Afterwards, they will receive a 1-minute rebuttal. Following the rebuttal period, they will both have 1 additional minute to issue their final thoughts. Debaters, to your positions.
Three-minute review. 3, 2, 1, go!
Okay, so the first time that I ran into Captain America and the Avengers was in the early 90s. It was actually 1991 when it came out. It was made by Data East, and it features the Marvel comic characters, the Avengers. You know, we all know the Avengers today. Back then, they were considered the maybe C-list characters of the Marvel industry. They were not Spider-Man. They weren't even the Fantastic Four. They were Captain America, Vision, Hawkeye, Iron Man. And in the video game, this is one of those rare cases where I played it on Sega Genesis. And the Sega Genesis version in my mind is the better version because it is simply easier and it is not cheap and the music actually sounds better. One of those times that the Sega sound card beat the NES sound card. That rarely happens given the fact that Super Nintendo sound card. That rarely happens that the Super Nintendo gets beaten by the Sega. Reason being is because the Super Nintendo was Nintendo's answer to the Sega Genesis, after the Sega Genesis was the answer to Nintendo's Nintendo. And in this video game, the characters do a lot of hokey stuff, a lot of weird voice acting. It almost reminds me of Resident Evil. One of the things Captain America likes to say at the beginning of each level is, "Okay, go!" And some of the villains will even say goofy stuff. I think Whirlwind is the one who says, "You will be the one escaping." And it's very classic in my mind because I was there when it came out. And it seemed to make sense. The actual gameplay is interesting because it takes you all over the planet. You go underwater, you go to the moon, you go to Red Skull's base, you go to a destroyed city and fight a sentinel, you fight an underwater giant robotic octopus, you fly on ships over like a big piece of water, a big belly of water from one city to another, you're on rooftops. It's literally straight out of the comic book. You're never going to get anything close to this from back in the day. Some other games were okay, some other games were great, but for Marvel character beat-em-ups, this was the game to play. It even features weird Marvel villains that are fun to look at, like Living Laser, Whirlwind, Sentinel, Wizard, Grim Reaper, Mandarin, Juggernaut, Ultron, and the Assassin Crossbones, and Red Skull himself. One of the most badass comic book villains of all time, and then you get help from side characters like Wasp, Quicksilver, Wonder Man, and Namor. So you're not going to be able to play this game and not get something cool from the Avengers. It's a badass Marvel beat 'em up, and I 100% love it. Thank you.
3-minute review. 3, 2, 1, go!
Captain America and the Avengers was released in 1991 for several different systems. To me, none of them are really worth playing despite the game's best efforts. Even in the arcade, this game doesn't look that great. You could turn to anything that Konami or Capcom was making at the time and see better products and better games that were better looking, more attractive, better sound, all of that stuff. Data East, not a terrible company, but they didn't have the finesse and the detail that Capcom and Konami had, and I only wish this game could have been put into their hands and what we could have seen from them. The Super Nintendo version is the worst version of this game because of some of the terrible difficulty that was put into it. Namely the fact that characters have, the enemies have mercy invincibility, leading to a much slower paced game. How can you go through a beat 'em up with that fast-paced action when you have to keep stopping because the enemies can't be hurt anymore until their invincibility frames die down? It's absolutely ridiculous. Not only does it destroy the pacing of the game, but it destroys any kind of fun that you have in it because you're just waiting around while these enemies can try to, get up and hurt you and you can't hurt them. The Sega version, even though it's better in terms of those mechanics, I still feel like this game is stilted with the lack of move variety that you have. Is it nice that you can throw Cap's shield all the time and use Iron Man's beams? Yeah, that part's fantastic, but the actual beat-em-up mechanics feel lazy. You don't ever really feel like you're making hard contact with enemies. And the generic mooks that they throw on you are kind of meaningless anyway. It does have some great bosses in it. It's a lot of fun seeing Crossbones show up in a video game where I don't even know if he's shown up in any sense this, or ever will for that matter. So it's weird seeing and great seeing some of those villains come out to play. But in general, this game suffers from a lack of detail in a lot of things. I don't think the music is very strong. There's at least one memorable track when you're flying through the second level and you're shooting down enemies and ultimately have to take down a sentinel. But the rest of the music is forgettable. The sound bites are okay. Some of them are missing on the Super Nintendo. The Sega Genesis one, Sega could almost never handle voice clips very well. I actually think that the Super Nintendo has the stronger soundtrack, even beating out the arcade, because the balance that I have in the arcade when I've played it versus the sound effects versus the music, the sound effects drown out the music, so you can't really even enjoy that. This game is paced properly. It's only got about 5 levels that are of pretty decent size, so it doesn't feel like it drags on for too long. But I feel like the flying mechanics and the shooting mechanics underwater are just retreads of what you could do on the ground, which wasn't that great to begin with. I wish the characters had more variety. The fact that Captain America does a flying kick instead of like shooting down lasers or arrows like the other guys do is not enough of a variation. I wish they had better stats or more unique moves. Something to differentiate these and make you feel like you're playing as a hero that is actually identifiable. I would not recommend this beat 'em up. There are far better ways to play as these characters in a fighting game as opposed to beat 'em up. Yield my time.
Rebuttal.
I think the soundtrack to this is very acceptable, actually, because it does feel like super heroic music. And not just the track that pumps you up on the second level. I think all of it kind of does that, and it definitely transitions well. It's definitely paced, like you said, very well, actually extremely well. Even with the boss rush battle at the end, everything feels right at place, right at home. The art style, you said it wasn't that good, but I would say maybe it counters it's more like a comic book than anything in my mind, and it definitely looks like it could be a comic book. Is it Data East's best game? No. Is it Data East's worst game? No. Have Capcom and other companies done it better? Yes. But I still think this game is great. I think you can have a good time. You can play it in one sitting and leave feeling like you didn't waste your time, and I'll yield the rest.
I should state that I don't think the music in this game is horrible. I just think that some of it is more forgettable as opposed to other tracks. But I do like how when you're playing against the bosses, there's like this swelling up of the music when the boss is nearing defeat. It's a kind of a dynamic soundtrack that you don't normally get in games of that era. Overall, I feel like the sprites on this are too small, and they're lacking in the grandeur that represents these characters. I would have liked to have seen more detail on those. In general, again, I feel like the biggest weakness of this game is more the fact that the hits and the punches, they don't feel like they have much weight to them. It almost feels like they're just like flopping around out there, as opposed to something that has like legitimate weight to it when you hit somebody, like in the Turtles in Time or in Final Fight, where there's actually like an impact. The game is lacking that, and it's lacking in general. I think a diverse cast of enemies outside of the villains, which I do love. I love the fact they have a great cast of villains. So if I could recommend this game, I would say only on the Sega, and that's about it.
Final thoughts.
I just remember having very fond memories of this game, and it was certainly one of those games where I went to someone's birthday, or it was my birthday, and we were at a pizza place. And in the arcade, this game was there, and it just reminds me of better days, good times, everything before the internet, before Instagram, Facebook. You know, you could look at the Avengers on the comic books, and I could finally look at them inside of an arcade cabinet. And the list of villains was just mind-blowing to me, because they actually took the time to try and cater to those villains and use them in the way that they thought they should be used. This isn't the best beat-em-up. I also obviously had access to Turtles in Time, X-Men Arcade, all the other games, Mortal Kombat for fighting, anything that was popular back then. But I just love this game, and I always will. And it's a great game. I think you should give it a chance because it's great.